Welcome to Media Empires, where we sit down with the most influential media creators right now to learn exactly how they built their empires. Our aim is to extract the secrets of top-tier podcasters, newsletter authors, and media creators who are breaking the old rules for media success. Whether you're looking to start your own empire or simply curious about the nuts and bolts behind media businesses, you'll find valuable insights and tactics in each episode. Grab your headphones, let's dive in.
In this week's episode, I'm joined by Matt McGarry, a newsletter expert and the founder of GrowLetter, who's worked with the Hustle and Milk Road. This is a masterclass on newsletters, covering insights from growing the hustle, newsletter conversion metrics, and future trends in newsletter monetization.
Matt, welcome to Media Empires. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Matt, why don't you give the audience a bit about your background and how you got into what you're doing right now in terms of becoming a newsletter expert and sharing that with the world?
Yeah, I got started in newsletters probably back in 2017, 2018, just curious about the space. I saw newsletters like Morning Brew, The Skim, all the ones that you know of, and thought that was a really cool business model. It seemed really elegant. So starting a little bit. I was in marketing at the time, DM'd back and forth a little bit with Sam Parr about Agora, which is a large newsletter company. And then 2 years later, there was a job opening at The Hustle, which is Sam Parr's newsletter company. And I got a job there. That role was basically growth for the Hustle daily newsletter, growing their email list with engaged subscribers. And so that's where I really cut my teeth learning media and newsletters. And after they were acquired by HubSpot and I spent some time there, I left to start a marketing agency that helps newsletters and media companies.
And why do that instead of start a collection of newsletters yourself?
I kind of fell into it. There just happened to be a lot of demand for consulting and people needing help around growing their email list or growing their audiences in newsletters. And so I started working with the Milk Road back in January of 22 when I was still at the Hustle, and there was a lot of client demand. And it seemed kind of like a no-brainer or a bad idea not to take on more clients and start building a team to help them. And later on, I did start a newsletter about newsletters. It's called Newsletter Operator. And that's a weekly newsletter, but honestly, it's more of a side project compared to the agency and the education products I have now. And that has been a great way to get clients for that, but it's not really a media company.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Agora. It's a pretty interesting company. Why don't you say more about it, or what makes it so interesting?
Yeah, Agora is a company that's almost like a holding company for financial newsletters or premium paid newsletters. They have, I don't know how many brands they have now, but I think at some time they had over 100 brands. At the peak, probably in 2019 or 2020, they were doing over $1 billion in revenue. Some of their largest franchises, like Agora Financial, or I think Stansberry's franchise inside the Agora company, were doing north of 100, $200 million in revenue. Their model is a lot different than the newsletters like Morning Brew and The Hustle, which we've talked about a ton. They're all about paid newsletters, and mostly it's financial advice, essentially, where they have a guru like a James Altucher or another person basically sell you information that may help you make better investments or learn about something related to making more money. And it can be a sketchy industry, but it's been very successful for them.
Yeah. And why say more about the differences between their model and the Morning Brew, or why don't the Morning, given how successful they are, why don't others sort of do the same format, or say more about the differences there?
I think people should learn from that more. I think people haven't learned from Agora as much because they're kind of under the radar. You can't Google them and find a lot about them that's useful. There are some public companies now that do what Agora does. One is MarketWise, which is started by one of the top franchises at Agora, a person called Porter Stansberry. And that company is probably more successful than Agora is now. But one of the key differences, it's all about selling information products like paid newsletters and physical newsletters too. So you'll subscribe for a front-end offer that might cost $50 to $100 per year. You'll get a weekly newsletter, and you'll get a newsletter in the mail once a month with different advice and analysis of investing in various research and stuff. So there's no advertising, or at least there's very little advertising as a revenue channel or a revenue stream for the Agora companies. It's all about selling these information products. And another thing that's different is they're very guru focused. So people follow people, as you know. It's really hard to sell a product about learning something or investing unless there's an authoritative guru in the mix. And so they partner with these gurus like James Altucher, and I can't think of other examples, but there's a ton more. And they build their brands around these gurus. So you wouldn't really know of the Agora brands like you know of Morning Brew, but you'll know of the gurus who they work with.
Right. But what I wonder is, do they hire the gurus, or how do they ensure that the gurus don't get so big as to leave them, and that they still have some lock in?
Yeah, I couldn't get too much information about this. I think it's all custom deals and it's a partnership where the gurus may be getting some upfront money and a percentage of sales. Sometimes that's very large, probably it might vary a lot between 10 and 50% of the sales generated or the profits generated. I couldn't get detailed numbers on that, but generally the more successful Agora franchises tend to partner with the best gurus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm also in the information products business. I've started with podcasts. I'd like to get into newsletters. And I'm also trying to create properties that help people either make more money or do better at their job, or grow in some professional way. And so businesses like Industry Dive, like Workweek, like the Agora are very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's the ones I would look at as great examples of doing the paid model well is Agora, MarketWise, which is a public company that's founded by Porter Stansberry, and then the Motley Fool, which has a large paid newsletter business, and they have many different business categories now and business models, but paid newsletters was the core one. The Motley Fool does north of $100 million per year in just paid newsletter revenue. So it's an interesting model. I would put them in a different category of newsletters than Industry Dive, Morning Brew, The Hustle, but a lot to learn from both. And I'm trying to, through some education, maybe through some of my own stuff, kind of bring the two models together. It's funny. Morning Brew, one of their biggest advertisers, not the biggest advertiser, was the Motley Fool. So they're already intermixing in that way, but they haven't quite, like Morning Brew hasn't started the paid newsletter, although it would make a lot of sense when they do that.
Yep. Fascinating. How about zooming out? Share more about your expertise and how exactly you support and work with people writing newsletters. Like, where are you strongest? Yeah, when you break down sort of the newsletter skill set, so to speak.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to just work with a lot of people doing very well and have a big impact. So, The Hustle, over 2.5 million subscribers, was the first hire at the Milk Road. Then I started working with Cody Sanchez 2 years ago or so. Then Sahil Bloom. We recently started working with James Clear. So I've just been behind the scenes and kind of seen what's worked. And then we've kind of developed a system or a model to grow newsletters and grow these email audiences and sell information products to these audiences. So I can talk a lot about exactly how we do that, or I can give a case study. What would be helpful to dive into?
But both, yeah. Talk about how you do it, and let's give a case study.
Yeah, what I focus on is paid marketing because all the companies we work with are their content businesses, their media businesses. They have the organic growth part figured out, especially if they're working with me. They're already pretty large usually. So I'm not doing any of that because that's their core competency. But they don't know anything about growing their audiences or selling products with paid advertising. And the paid advertising that we're using is usually Meta ads, but also Twitter and TikTok ads have worked for us. So that's kind of the core service we do and what I've done for a long time, even before I had this agency with The Hustle and others. And so that's been a great channel. If you look at The Hustle over the lifetime of that newsletter, we acquired over 1 million subscribers just from Facebook ads alone, many more from other channels. When I was working there, about 90% of our growth was from paid advertising, which a lot of people wouldn't expect from a media company or a newsletter company. They think if you're not selling a paid product, you don't really use paid advertising to grow your business. But Morning Brew has done it just as much as The Hustle. Industry Dive has too. It's kind of, up until recently, it was kind of an unspoken thing that not a lot of people didn't know about. They kind of thought all these audiences grew organically or they grew through referral programs or things like that. But it's not really how it happened. That's usually a smaller mix of the audiences. And the reason why is because you can only grow so much organically and only so quickly, right? If it's really hard to, you can grow to 100,000 newsletter subscribers organically. People like Cody and Sahil have done that. But going from 100K to a million is much harder. And so that's where paid growth comes in. And what we're able to do is acquire a high quality newsletter subscriber for around $1 to $3. That's a big range. The average for our clients right now is two. Back at The Hustle for a very long time, they were acquiring subscribers for $1.50. We've had some clients, especially on the creator side, consistently get subscribers for $1 and drive hundreds of thousands of subscribers for $1. And the reason it makes sense to do this is because the LTV of that subscriber through paid advertising or through selling them a product or service, a lot of times the LTV per subscriber is anywhere from $5 to $25, and they might realize that LTV over a 1 to 2 year period. And so the CAC to LTV ratio for a newsletter business can actually be really good. And so that's why it makes sense to do this.
Say more like a business like a Hustle or Morning Brew. How much are they making per user, and how do they make that money per the user?
Yeah, those I would say their LTV, and this is like a guess at this point because it's been a while since I've worked at the Hustle. Their LTV is anywhere from like $15 to $25 per subscriber for their B2C newsletters. For their B2B stuff like Morning Brew, the LTV is much higher, but also the CAC or subscriber acquisition cost is much higher. And the retention is really good for these too. So if they stick around for a year, they're likely to be subscribed for multiple years.
And the way they make money is it via ads or subscription, or how do they make the
Yeah,
money
so
off these?
for the Hustle Morning Brew, most of our clients it's ads. So there's an ad in every newsletter, and typically that's sold, let's say, at around a $50 CPM. So these newsletters are making 5 cents per open, and so if someone's opening like 50% of the newsletters, or sometimes it's higher, they might make 50 cents per subscriber per month. Oftentimes it's even higher than that, but that's if you're doing very well. Not every newsletter is doing that well. We're talking about like the best examples in the industry. But so that's the type of like revenue you can see per month, and the type of LTV some of these better newsletters might see.
And so, what are the different channels that are most effective in 2024 for the paid marketing on newsletters?
It's really meta. I wish there were more secrets and new channels that were popping up. There's just meta. I think ATT has hindered a lot of the other alternative channels like a TikTok or Twitter. So Meta's still the best, and it just comes down to making amazing ad creative on that platform. Twitter's interest and opportunity because the ad costs are so low right now. Like all the advertisers have pulled out, so it could be a great time to come into it. And we've had some success with Twitter. Sometimes there's been some real outliers on Twitter, but it's generally with the type of content or product that has a really passionate fan base on Twitter. So if AI newsletters, Twitter's been a great ad platform. We're able to get subscribers for less than $1 many times. But for newsletters that might be out of that category, even things like sports or things that are more niche, Twitter just hasn't worked for us. So Meta's where we go. I can elaborate on that, but the only other one I'll mention is other newsletters are a great place to acquire subscribers. If you know how to buy in other newsletters, you know what rates are going to give you an ROI. The quality of a subscriber from another newsletter is much, much higher than paid social or social media, right? Like we're seeing, Meta ads might give us a subscriber that's a 40% open rate, and another newsletter might give us a 60 or 70% open rate and better retention too. So those are some of the differences you see between channels.
And what's a high level framing for how to make creative that's engaging on Meta?
You want it to be native. So you want this just to not look like an ad, essentially. You want it to look like a Facebook post or Instagram video or a reel, whatever that might be. And so a lot of times we're studying what is going viral organically on those platforms, or even what's going virally organically on another platform like Twitter. So we might look at viral threads and see what hooks they're using, or viral TikToks and see what hooks they're using, and use that as an ad. A lot of the things that we're not doing are, heavily branded graphics, like a big logo, something that just looks obviously like an ad. That stuff we're not using. So at the most basic level, a lot of the ads that have worked well for us are just a screenshot of like an iPhone Note app. That works well. Motion graphics work great, which is basically text on screen and a video in the background that could be like a cityscape or a landscape or whatever it might be. The copy is really doing the selling in a motion graphic, but it works well. It's also something that can work on the feeds, Instagram and Facebook feeds, and also in the reels and stories. And the one of the best ones is UGC videos. So having a content creator like a TikToker or just an actor filming an kind of iPhone selfie style video talking about the newsletter or the benefits of the newsletter. So those are the types of things that we're doing. There's lots of nuances to all those, of course, but that's what's working.
And say more about the best ways to use other newsletters to grow or to partner with them, or et cetera.
Yeah, you kind of have to go after under monetized newsletters, ones that don't quite know their value yet, or sometimes you can buy up unused ad inventory at a lower rate. Because if you're paying full price and someone really knows exactly what the maximum they can get, you're not going to get an ROI on this, especially for when you're buying as a newsletter, as a media company, your CPA or your customer subscriber acquisition cost has to be really low, right? We're talking $2 to $5 per subscriber, whereas a lot of B2B companies that are usually advertising in newsletters can pay a lot more. So, what you basically want to look at is the metrics of what the ad result is, and so what's the cost, of course, and how many clicks and what the cost per click is, and then you can do some basic math to figure out what your cost per subscriber would be if all those metrics are true when you run the ad in that newsletter. And so if the CPA is on target for you, it would be a good fit. You probably want to give yourself some margin of safety. So ideally, the CPA is even lower than your target because sometimes ads perform better or worse. So like there's no guarantee when it comes to buying an ad in a newsletter. If you can buy based off of a cost per click instead of a flat fee, that's a great option because you know what you're paying per click, and instead of paying just a flat fee to get access to that audience. And you're probably going to find better results buying amongst a lot of smaller newsletters rather than a small amount of big newsletters. So you're not going to go buying a Morning Brew and the Hustle and those newsletters. You're going to buy across a lot of newsletters that have 10 to 50,000 subscribers that have lower ad rates. That's going to work well for you. And then also, if you can develop a relationship with these people and say, hey, whenever an advertiser pulls out, can we have some type of pre-agreement where you just run my ad at a lower rate and I get charged for that then? Buying remnant inventory or unsold inventory is probably the best bargain that you can do. And so if you can develop those types of deals, that's really good.
Totally. Well said.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody. If you don't already subscribe to the Media Empires newsletter, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power this and other Turpentine newsletters is called Beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business. And they built Beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails, from essayists to business owners. The platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, Newsletter Operator, and so many more. Beehiiv's founder hooked up Media Empires listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code EMPIRES. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.
What are your thoughts on podcasts? And feel free to shoot them down. Obviously, if you don't do them to some degree, if you thought super highly of them, you would be engaged with them. What are your thoughts on podcasts in general, or how they relate to newsletters?
I love podcasts. I'm personally just a media consumer of podcast. That's really where I probably consume most of my media. From a marketing perspective, the challenge is they're harder to grow, not necessarily because people don't want to listen to podcasts, but because the attribution isn't there. And a lot of the stuff you know, of course, but you can't see where a download came from or where a podcast subscriber came from, and so that makes it hard to determine where you should invest more time and energy into growing that audience. And that's not the case with newsletters. We can see great attribution. We can see, they came from Facebook or organic or direct or SEO or whatever it might be. And that helps us determine, like, it just makes it easier to market it, of course, or even measure like ROI on those marketing channels. So that's the main con I see of podcasts. You've mentioned in other episodes of this show before that podcasts can be a medium that like turns into basically every other medium. So it can turn into a newsletter through transcripts or through like a written version of it, video, etc. That's really smart. So I think if you have a podcast, you got to think about email as part of your strategy in some way, and it could be really simple too. It could just be like, if you join the email list or the newsletter, you get access to the show notes and the edited transcripts. It doesn't have to be a complicated strategy.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you would do if you were me, right? Like I'm sitting on 15 podcasts, all within these different niches. I'm thinking about expanding formats, but kind of going more bottoms up, and I want to be a bit more sophisticated in how I'm thinking about it. If you were trying to build as big of a media business as possible, what would you do if you were me?
Yeah, I would start with low hanging fruit and kind of build upon things. I wouldn't think about having some big newsletter launch that you announce at a later date and you build up to. I would just start collecting emails right away. I think the sooner the better. So I would do kind of what I described as like give every show. You don't even have to call it a newsletter if you don't want to, but get every show an email list. I like Beehiiv for this, and like every episode to get access to the detailed show notes and the edited transcripts, they have to subscribe. And with Beehiiv, you can have an email gated page where you can just link that page in the episode description. They can click there and then enter their email address, and they automatically get access to those notes and transcriptions, and maybe some bonus content. But that's all. So you're going to get your best fans right away on the email list. And I wouldn't even worry about sending anything to those subscribers right away. You can basically use it as a notification channel at first. So when a new episode comes out, you publish a newsletter and a post about it. The newsletter goes out to all subscribers, and the post is email gated and used in your description. Maybe share it on social too. That's what I would do first. And then where you go from there, I mean, we can go. That's where you can go in a lot of different
Yeah.
directions, where it's harder to say.
Well, let's have that conversation. How would you think about the different directions, or et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to do 15 newsletters at once and really grow them and monetize them efficiently unless it's in a way that's kind of like under monetized. Like if you're selling basically banner ads of all the newsletters, then it's easy. But then the CPMS for those ads are awful. Um, so you might pick a certain batch of 3 to 5 to focus on at first. Um, where I think about is like what are the basic marketing channels that we can use, and so how do we use all of our digital real estate to get subscribers? So call to actions in the social profiles and the podcast websites, and basically all the digital real estate you have, you need a call to action for the newsletter. I try and get people to link to a landing page rather than a link tree or multiple links, because you just have a much higher conversion rate. And it's a small detail, but a landing page might have a 50% conversion rate where your link tree might have a 25%. And so it's double the growth of your email list if you're going to a landing page. That's a common thing I see that I think is a mistake. But of course, it's hard to prioritize what to promote. Um, I don't think the content needs to be complicated. I think edited transcripts, notes, if you can give the episode a narrative or give key takeaways, I think I'd be happy to read that. And a lot of people would too. Kind of a summary. I don't think that's going to bastardize the podcast listens, because I think it's more of a preference. Like a lot of people are going to look at both. So a lot of people are concerned about that when they repurpose content. I don't think it's ever a bad idea to repurpose content. So that's what I would do with the content. It's transcripts, notes, key takeaways from the episode that I can read. And then if you wanted to throw in some curated content, I think that's a good idea too. Curated content is basically like a link section where it's different resources or things that you bookmarked or found that week that are useful. You've seen like Tim Ferriss's 5 Bullet Friday. Sahil Bloom has his like 1, 2, 3 newsletter, or 5 on Friday newsletter where he shares these things. I think some curated content or finds from the host of the podcast episodes would be really cool. And I think you've got do you have like over 3 or 5 hosts now for the show? So you've got a couple of people who might basically they can just share their Twitter bookmarks with you, and you can include some of those things in the podcast or in the newsletter, excuse me. So that's what I think the content would look like. And I forget how much you publish all the podcast. I imagine it's like around once or twice a week now. So you have a once or twice a week newsletter. That's hopefully not too much work. Um, so honestly, the content is the part I would spend the least amount of time on. I would spend more time on growth and monetization. You could get into paid ads, but if you're going to use paid ads, I would think about that as a way to grow the newsletter and the podcast at the same time. But that also maybe getting ahead of ourselves, right? But to speak on that really quickly, if you wanted to use paid ads to grow, what you would basically do is have a landing page where you kind of advertise the podcast and the newsletter. On one page, they enter their email address, and then they're automatically redirected to a page that prompts them to download and listen to the podcast. So it's really hard to advertise things directly to a podcast because you can't track that. We've tried that a little bit with My First Million back when I worked at the Hustle, a long time ago. That didn't really work for them. But if you can click the email address first and then have a call to action with the podcast immediately afterwards, that can be a good strategy. And I think monetization, like, right now, sponsorships is the main thing you're doing. And I would think about it as just another ad product that you can sell. At first, it might be like make goods or bonuses you give to advertisers because you're really early in this business, and so that might be what the newsletter inventory is now. But as the audiences continue to grow, this can be a really lucrative placement for you that you can sell. There's more other ways of monetizing that might be better later on, but that's the best place to start.
Yeah. Let's zoom out. In terms of picking niches, whether it's for podcasts or newsletters, you've written a bit about this. What advice would you give me? I could go deep into every, I have HR and finance. I could do every kind of position at a company. I could do every sector. I could do all different types of business topics. I want to do the things that compound and make the most money. What advice would you give me?
I like to reverse engineer it from revenue, and so it depends on the type of revenue. So if it's sponsorship and advertising revenue, or partnership revenue, or lead gen revenue, which is kind of all in one bucket or category, you want to find out where the most advertisers are buying at the highest rates, and then do something in that category or in that topic. And I wouldn't be too concerned if there's other newsletters or podcasts in that space or not, because I think it's all about execution. There's always room for something different or better when it comes to niches or content. So for people that are picking a niche, like, don't be afraid of competition. If you can do something different, that there's room for people to listen to you too. So the types of niches that have a lot of advertisers, B2B is a big one, which you're already in. HR is big, marketing is big. um, I would look at the niches or the verticals that Workweek are in, which is kind of a B2B newsletter company. I would look at the verticals that Industry Dive are in. There's a couple other examples like Endeavor Business Media and AG Media. There's probably many more that I don't know of as well, because I don't know the B2B industry as well as consumer media. But look at what verticals are doing well for them. And it might take some additional research to find that, because Industry Dive has over 30 verticals. Probably not all of them are working super great for them. But the ones that are, that might be a vertical to think about. And maybe you could try and measure how many advertisers are in that vertical. There's tools like Who Sponsors Stuff and openrates.co that allow you to see who is advertising in other newsletters. And you can get some idea of, you can get some data on how many advertisers there are and what rates they're paying in other newsletters. Those tools are kind of expensive, but it might be worth it, especially for someone like you. Um, that's what I would think about. So that's sponsorships, but also if we're going to sell memberships or information products or subscriptions, in what spaces and categories do people actually pay for those types of things? People don't pay for a lot of like cooking subscriptions or sports subscriptions. I know there's the Athletic, but that's kind of a rare exception. Where they're paying mostly for subscriptions is things that help them make more money. So that's investment advice, and that's advice on how to build a business or do certain things within building a business, better marketing, better sales, those types of things. Basically, things that are going to give them a financial ROI. So that's what I would look at on the information product side. So obviously, all the Agora type companies we mentioned, those are great. It's kind of outside of what you're doing now. So I don't think you have any. Well, you do have some stuff in investing, I think, a little bit, but entrepreneurship. Obviously, a lot of people are paying for things to help them start a business. I like the podcast you have called Request for Startups. I think that's a really good idea, and maybe there's a paid opportunity there. And then to help people do their jobs, better. There's lots of like paid marketing products and communities. Same thing for sales. Those types of things. So that's the two different ways that I think about it. There's no perfect answer to it, but those are some things I would consider.
And do you think I should combine monetization models, or should I kind of pick one and go sort of super deep in it?
It's really hard to do too, because you're kind of building different business models. One is sponsorships, and then one is like we're a totally different type of company. We're selling information products. I think in the long run, you want to have two. And what I am worried about for a lot of people is that if you pick one early on, it kind of becomes hard to transition the company later to the other thing. So a quick example of that is when I worked at the Hustle for a long time, they were all newsletter email sponsorships. And then Sam and the team there wanted to diversify the business and build a subscription. So they built trends.co. It was very successful, grew to 5 million ARR very quickly. But they basically had the entire team focused on that. And then the email list started to decline and the revenue started to decline there. So they went from like 1.5 million to 1.3 million subscribers. And I kind of came on to help them fix the Hustle and grow that and turn it around. But those are the types of things that can happen if you kind of do it later on. So I would think about what are the low lift ways that you can have a subscription or an information product. It's probably going to be a thing that has less features and it's a lower price. And then later on, you might be able to add more to that later. And so we recently had Adam Ryan from Workweek on the podcast, and he's tested a bunch of different product types, information, events, SaaS, across his different newsletters and all the different stuff they have. I think they have some podcasts too, or they're doing more than just newsletters. I call it a B2B newsletter company, but it's a little bit more than that now. What he said is that memberships worked best for them. And I value his insight because they've tested so much and they've spent so much money on various products to sell in their newsletters. So, I mean, the membership in their context is essentially a paid community for people in that vertical. So they have like a HR membership, and I think they have a fintech membership and a healthcare membership. And so that type of product is, I mean, it's easier said than done, but it's not super complicated. And so that might be something to think about. Can you sell a membership for $100 to $1,000 per year, not put a ton of effort into building that product and operating it, and at least still have these two revenue streams instead of just building the company all around one thing and trying to pivot later?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, right now we're just ads because I've seen Industry Dive and others do that. Um, on let's say I studied Workweek or Morning Brew or all these businesses like super intimately. What do you think my behavior would change? Like, what would I learn such that I would sort of evolve certain behavior? Like, one thing you mentioned was, hey, if you study Workweek closely, you might pick some of the niches that are doing really well and try to do something there. Is there anything else you think I would deeply that I might evolve my strategy, or you would evolve your strategy based on the Workweek example if you were running Turpentine?
Yeah, you also, we should mention that Morning Brew has a lot of successful B2B newsletters. So if you're looking for other examples of B2B, I forgot about that, but they're very successful in B2B. That's a tough one. I would kind of reverse engineer what advertisers are working with them the most, because that could be a great partner for you or any other media company, or it could be a potential product idea for you. So those are some things I would consider.
What do you mean
Let's
product
see
idea?
here. Yeah, product idea as in like, if there's another information or education type product that's advertising those companies, maybe that's something you can develop that's a good fit for your audience. So, for example, like Motley Fool advertises, one of the biggest advertisers in Morning Brew and in the Hustle. Maybe they should have started that product. A lot of people I think internally at Morning Brew wanted to, but it didn't work out that way, or it may not have been the best fit for them. So those are two things I would consider. I would think about like what did they do? Because they just started in a different time. Workweek is more recent, but they're also younger and not as developed as Industry Dive and Morning Brew in the Hustle. So like, what did they do back then that like is not going to work for you? I would think about that too. Oftentimes people think of like Morning Brew's referral program, and they think if they have a perfect referral program, that's going to lead them to success. But that just tactic doesn't really work anymore. Like audience growth tactics change, and you have to figure out what the current thing is when it comes to audience growth. And that might be it's kind of a reverse way of answering your question, but that might be a thing to avoid when you're studying these companies.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one thing I'm asking myself is how many of these can there be? So we have an HR podcast. It's great. We could do an HR newsletter, but there is HR Brew. There is HR Dive. There is Workweek has an HR newsletter, just as you mentioned. Am I just going to be sort of hoping that that either they can be multiple winners or that we can out execute these companies on the same niches? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think this is winner media isn't winner take all as tech or marketplace businesses can be. So there's definitely room. However, of course, as there is more supply in newsletters, then the ad rates could go lower in that category because advertisers have more option and there's more competition. So you run into those challenges. Like you've seen a bunch of AI newsletters pop up, and there's it's great for advertisers, but there's so many places to buy, but also the ad rates are really low. They're selling at $10 or $20 CPMs, whereas maybe before they could sell at $40 or $50 on CPM. So that's the challenge with it. I think there's always room if you're different, but there's going to be more competition there. But it really is an execution game. So I don't think there's limited opportunity, but it's kind of all a trade off as how many are in the space versus not. But then also when you go into a new category, you kind of have to pioneer that. So there's also a risk there as well. So there is merit in doing what's already working and just doing it in a different way or a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So your advice to me would be to go into these different business niches where enterprise buyers, target enterprise buyers, basically the industry dive, both across positions and sectors, and just try to create really good media.
I think that's the way to go. I think there's you don't have to overcomplicate it. I think if you can create better content than anybody else,
Yeah.
you can do really well. Because if you look at Industry Dive and even Morning Brew, when these organizations grow really big, their ability to create content just seems to just drop dramatically. I think
Yeah.
when you're small and agile and have all these awesome creators and are really passionate and early, like the quality of your content can be way better. I've seen this at the Hustle, whereas like after they were acquired by HubSpot, I think it's just a whole different dynamic, and it's not the same as it used to be. So I think that can be one of your many advantages you have as a smaller company, where it's just like a multi-$100 million corporation is not going to be able to be as edgy or cool or as insightful as you might be.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you have a great post on newsletter niches, and you say that the ones that monetize the best are SaaS, B2B software, which is effectively very similar, and personal finance and investing. And then you describe a few different, the top 10 best ones. You have finance and investing. We have a couple podcasts there, but we should get more. You have great examples like personal finance for founders or investing in single family homes. You then mentioned luxury. I have nothing there. I wonder if that's a distraction or if I should get into that. You have
that's a
B2B.
tough one.
Yeah,
It's very different than what you're doing now, the luxury one, but it could work for some people.
Yeah. Then you have B2B, HR, marketing, IT, healthcare, media, banking. I'm in HR, and I'm not in the other ones. So there's a big opportunity there that would be more adjacent. Sports betting and fantasy sports, perhaps. I'm a big basketball guy, but perhaps a bit too far out. Local news, that's pretty interesting. I'm not doing anything there. And then you have hyper niche, hyper passionate audiences. We have some creators who have a good loyal audience that's high value, like a Burn Hobart, for example, has a big finance audience. But yeah, great. I don't know if any reactions from me reading that.
Yeah, so a couple ones. I think let's start with let's see, a local media. I think it's interesting. If you 6 a.m. City is probably the leading newsletter company in that space. There's lots of people in local media. The it's just you're so relevant to the audiences there because you're talking about what's happening in their town or their city. So I think there's going to be many more small seven figure local newsletters pop up over the next year or two. It's really hard to grow to seven figures and beyond in one town, but you can start to go horizontal and expand to multiple towns around yours or go across the country like 6 a.m. City has. The content is pretty straightforward and easy. The growth is easy. We've helped some of these companies with ads, and we're acquiring really engaged subscribers for 40 cents, 50 cents. And so the audience acquisition cost is just way lower. However, there's a smaller TAM, of course, in each town. The CPMs can be really good on ads. However, what's hard about local media is if you're going to sell ads locally, it's just like hand-to-hand combat. Like you're going to meetings locally in your town, you're driving around meeting people. So that's the challenge in local newsletters. Of course, you could monetize it with national advertisers instead of just local, but there is some advantage to having local advertisers. So I love local newsletters. I think there's just unlimited room for lots of like small hyper niches like reef keeping or motorcycles or things that kind of take some money to get into and people really love and are passionate about. You're not going to have a seven-figure newsletter of maybe one of these, but if you can do one about a passion that's like a board game and like multiple things, like you can start to build these up. That can be difficult though, because the monetization is difficult because there may be limited advertisers in that niche. But also because the niches are so small, people might pay for communities or information products around those things. But that's an opportunity too. Yeah, I think that's all I have to add on those. But there is a lot of opportunities, and I think as people see like email as being, in my opinion, like the most sustainable way to build an audience, the audience opportunities are endless.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The HR. Let's go back to the content for a second, because you were sort of outlining a path where I kind of adapt the podcast and build on top of it. That would be super natural or organic for us to do. But there's also a world where, let's say the AI podcast, where we could just try to create the best AI newsletter that sort of covers what's happening in the industry, almost like what FreightWaves has done for trucking, but for AI. and hire reporters and kind of build out this almost publication that tries to really, from an inside perspective, like break down what's happening in AI, that would be like much more sort of, fleshed out than sort of just rehash of the podcast and with some more links. How should I think about the trade-offs as it relates to that, or what would you advise?
I think that may make a lot of sense. The challenge is that that niche has just become really competitive. So there's lots of upstarts in the space that are doing newsletters or podcasts or just any type of media. But then also there's the incumbents that are covering this really deeply too. Um, Even like the Morning Brew, New York Times, and those types of bigger media companies. So that's where it's a challenge. I do think there's a lot of room for AI for a specific job or industry. So AI for marketers, that might be one that's a little bit more saturated, but there's many more because it's going to affect everyone eventually, right? So I think that's where you can kind of build these like niche or B2B publications that are focused on AI or tailored to AI, and you might even allow them to be more open-ended. So it's like AI isn't in the name necessarily, so maybe that's where you focus on content, but over time you can cover things more broadly for that industry. I just think having like the go-to AI publication is a bloodbath, and I don't know if anyone can really succeed with that right now. Especially because some of the biggest players got started really heavily, 2 years ago, and have massive audiences now.
Yeah. And so maybe let's take something like HR, for example. There are already a bunch of, well, the companies we mentioned, Morning Brew, Work Week, Industry Dive, there are examples like, and so is what you described for AI basically true for any business niche that I'm interested in, that, hey, winners already exist and thus I should just kind of adapt to the podcast as opposed to have a more fleshed out, try to hire a creator or hire a journalist and try to sort of become like the publication of record in that space? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'm we generally just find the niches and the differences work better than becoming the go-to one. I think you have all these different publications, so you might find one that's just the engagement, the monetization is way off the charts, and so that's where you build that like more in-depth publication. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I imagine it's hard to do that across 15 different verticals, right? So I don't have an answer there. Where I feel good about and where I feel like I can make a difference, and what I recommend to people is like you can be significantly better in your content, in your growth, and your monetization than a lot of the competitors. Like you could have 50% of the subscriber acquisition cost. You can make twice as much per subscriber. You can have an audience that's twice as engaged as the competitors. Like that is very, very achievable. It's not all the same out there. And a lot of people don't realize how much different they can be or better they can be than even some of the companies that are really successful. Like they don't have everything figured out perfectly. And that's the type of space that I try and play in, or that I think about. I'm also very much a marketing oriented person. So that's kind of my mindset.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a few years ago, there was this thing called First Round Review. It still exists, but it used to be much bigger or much more sort of unique in tech ecosystem. And they would basically just interview influential people, and then kind of write firsthand reports based on the interview, under their name. And so they would share it, and that did pretty well. And it was kind of, they had an HR person, and they would kind of be a superset over these sort of niches that I have. Would you recommend? So one thing I'm asking myself is like on taxonomy, should I have kind of one master newsletter and feature a bunch of content that might be interesting to a wide subset, or should I just build these niches over time? Like The Information is a media company that has a homepage, but they also have all these niche newsletters too. How should I think about taxonomy? By taxonomy, I just mean, how should I organize this? Like, should I organize it? And of the 15 podcasts, maybe only like 7 of them are truly different topics. Like, meaning I have some podcasts with people who already have big newsletters, so I wouldn't start another newsletter based on the show because they already use their newsletter to advertise it.
Yeah, that's not going to be a fit in that case.
Yeah. So I have like an
Yeah.
HR one, a finance one, an AI one, maybe a media empires one, maybe a few other ones, but and we'll add more. And the question is, should we just grow it one newsletter at a time, or should we have kind of this master brand or master sort of newsletter or homepage that aims to build traffic first and then then drive traffic to individual niches?
I don't think you do. And sometimes it's an advantage if you have, 3 podcasts and 3 newsletters in the same category. You can cross promote them across each other, and that can be really helpful. Whereas it might be better than just having one. Even if you have a lot of subscribers that overlap, you still have more subscribers. And generally, if you own all of these newsletters, it's better to have more people across multiple newsletters than just having one. So I don't think you need to have like these the higher level publications where there's brands underneath those or sub brands underneath those. I don't think you need that. I think you could have literally 15 different newsletters. Obviously, you won't have that many right now, but you could have that over time. Um, I think there is some value to like having one core brand, which is Turpentine, because people that subscribe to all of those things will still know of that, and so they'll be more likely to read a publication from your parent brand. But I wouldn't. It just becomes really complicated where you have Turpentine and then you have another one, then you have ones underneath that. I would kind of just have the parent company, and then everything could have a different newsletter. And it's okay if there's a lot of cross pollination. Real quick, that's a strategy used by Agora a lot. Is they want to get people on as many newsletters and email lists as possible, as long as they own them. So they do a lot of this. You'll be subscribed to one newsletter, and then you'll wind up on 7 different financial newsletters that are free and daily, but they're all from the same parent company.
Fascinating. So you say the more newsletters, the better, as long as they're good, the more differentiated, the better. And should I be trying to go deep? Like, should I have like 3 HR podcasts? Like, should I be trying to get sort of density on these different spaces?
That may depend, because if they're different enough, sometimes it makes sense for one podcast to cover those topics that would have been in the other one. Um, but I mean, I think Work Week. I think they have a couple spaces that seem pretty niche, like fintech or HR, or direct response, like D2C marketing, and they have 2 newsletters for each of those different things. So that's definitely a possibility, as long as there's a different way you're handling it, or a kind of a different subset of an avatar within that audience. But that really just all depends on the context, and it's going to vary depending on the audience, the industry, the topic, all that stuff. So it's hard to give a good answer there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What have I not talked about that you think I should, or what have I not asked you that I think I should ask you as it relates to Turpentine and how to make our business more successful?
I think we didn't talk about what that owned product could be for your brand. We dabbled in some different ideas, but if you had anything you're interested in pursuing, always down to talk about that now or later. Um, but also, I mean, it's like, even do you want to do that right now? It's also like, is the timing right? Is that the best thing? Because that's not
Yeah.
always obvious either.
And can you say more about some examples of what that could look like, or what you might do if you were us?
Yeah, I would like go back to the simple like membership information product type thing. I don't think this needs to be a SaaS product or anything complicated. Like, what's the simplest path to direct revenue, not from a third party advertiser? That's what I would think about. I think you'll kind of thank your future self if you have that early on, within like the first 2 years of your business. So that's what I would think about. The hustle, that was trends. Work week, that seems to be the memberships. Morning Brew never really figured this out, and I think that held their business back a little bit. They're very massively successful, but I think the team there would love to have that.
It's interesting. One product I think a lot about is like something in the Tegus style space. So Tegus is this expert network, like a GLG, that records the calls that the expert calls and then sells access to the transcripts. If tens of thousands of transcripts, maybe 70,000, and the price point is really expensive. It's like $25,000 per seat to have access to this compounding data set, because that data set helps guide investment decisions. It's interviews about certain spaces, on certain trends, on certain markets, on certain companies, on certain products. And people see it, or investment firms see it, as kind of table stakes for their diligence process. And if they're about to put tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into a company, they want to thoroughly, diligence it and make sure they're doing the right company. So I'm investing in the right company. So I'm wondering if the media company could evolve into that, where if we create these media products, podcasts and newsletters, about different trends, different markets, different companies, different products. Maybe some of it would be shared publicly and ad supported, and some of it would be shared privately behind a paywall. That's fairly expensive. Any reactions to
Yeah,
that?
that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a great direction to go in. I'm sure there's many other good examples of that too. Like HR, people need to know the number as well of salaries. I'm not an HR expert at all, but like they need to know data about what people are getting paid, retention, those types of things. So that's valuable for HR in many different B2B niches. So I like that one. That definitely is one that's harder to develop, and I think you would crush it with paid communities too. And that would be a way to potentially just kind of use that revenue to invest more in growth if that's something you want to do. So that might be something to consider, because I don't think it has to be to one or the other, right? I think you can do both of those things. So I think that's like the great long term play. In a short term play might be helpful too, and then also you might have a more engaged audience to sell that product to when you have that available.
Yeah, totally. Um, and then how about on the monetization? What's you mentioned some people can monetize 2x as well. What separates the people who do that from ones who don't?
Yeah, so one is just being great salespeople essentially, and these salespeople they're just like it's not. It's very input based. Like they're emailing more, they're calling more, they're getting more leads. Workweek's created this. They brought on some of the best salespeople from the Hustle and Morning Brew. Adam Ryan was the former head of partnerships at the Hustle, and so like that's one thing they do really well with, and that's so they have higher CPMS than some of their competitors in some spaces. And it also rewards larger businesses too, right? So that's one way to do it is just to be better at sales. I think it's harder for you when you're a younger business. The other way you monetize better is by just having something to sell people and doing a good job of that. That's usually these information types of products, and a lot of people building in media and podcasts and newsletters just don't even have that. And so I think you're at a huge advantage if you have something as simple as the products we just talked about. Because if you can convert 1 to 5% of your free audience to that, now you have way more revenue than you did with 0%. So it's really as simple as that. There's all types of sophisticated marketing tactics on how you sell these things and those types of products. I would look at the Agora companies on how they do that because they're some of the best direct response marketers and copywriters out there. But those are the two categories or two buckets that I would think about as far as monetization goes. And also another category for you, real quick, is lead gen. Because you're in B2B, people don't always want to just buy flat fee sponsorships. They want to get leads into their database who are decision makers at companies in HR, marketing, or whatever category that might be. And so having a lead gen type of product or selling lead gen services can be a great another kind of third bucket for monetization too that most people don't even understand at all or think about at all.
Yeah. And what do you think about someone was pitching me on this podcast the other day around doing some sort of agency that helps other podcasts or even newsletters sell to brands? Because if we're already building that capacity in house, should we just be like the clearinghouse for it or something? What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, that's cool. You don't want to distract you too much with that, but because you're doing it, it makes a lot of sense, right? And you can basically be like this ad network where you have all of your shows and then you have these additional shows, and you might be able to make more from because you're only like less than 2 years old. You could get a lot of bigger shows that might be bigger revenue drivers of that agency, and you take a cut of that. So that could work well. I think you really have to have some great experienced operators in that because what we've found in those types of businesses, it's actually more about the advertiser relationships and the publisher relationships. So like Eric, you could totally get all the publishers that could sustain that business, but can you get the advertisers? Because in that kind of two-sided marketplace type of network. So that's the part I would think about is like, if we can get the advertisers, then we'll get the publishers, but not really the other way around. There are some people who have done this in the newsletter space too. Like Mad Rev is from Katie Huff, who used to work at the Hustle, and she basically took that all of her advertiser relationships at the Hustle and started a an ad network for newsletters. And so she's had a lot of success, and there's lots of other examples too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, let's close by just having you plug your work for people who want to go deeper and learn more and maybe even engage one of your courses when you share more.
Yeah, the best thing is to go to newsletteroperator.com. That's where you can find my free newsletter, links to my agency, links to my podcast, and everything else. I publish a weekly newsletter about how to grow and monetize your newsletter. It's read by about 15,000 people. And I've got really good feedback on the tactics in there. So if you want actionable advice and strategies about how to do the stuff we talked about and that go a little bit deeper into some of these topics, that's where you can find it.
And is there there's a link to the podcast as well?
Yeah, you'll find the link to the podcast there. My podcast is also called Newsletter Operator.
Yeah. And lastly, what advice would you give me or anyone listening to someone who's trying to hire like a head of newsletters to start the strategy that you recommended?
Yeah, it's a really small industry, so you can probably, if you get that job posting out and you share it with a lot of people like me or people at Morning Brew or Industry Dive, you can get a lot of eyeballs on it from people in the space. And your best bet would probably be to hire someone from those companies, not necessarily a Morning Brew, but there's all types of companies that are doing well in this space. Even it doesn't have to be like the top dog at one of those companies, but someone who has a lot of hands-on experience in those businesses. I think that could be a great way to do it. There also might be some people who have kind of like started the newsletter or failed one or kind of building it on the side that might be a good fit for this too. That are super entrepreneurial but still need a job to learn this first. So that's generally what I found. And sorry, that's not the. It's kind of generic. Like find someone from one of these other companies, but there's a lot of people who are looking for different things at these companies, and there's a lot of talent there.
And is the title head of newsletters the right title, or what would you recommend?
I like that. Yeah, I think you can have someone, especially at what you need at this point. I think you can kind of have that head of newsletters person do just about everything for the newsletter.
At what point would I think about needing to build a team beyond that person?
I think you're going to need some basic assistance on the operations of your transcripts, like writing the takeaways, all that stuff. A lot of that could be kind of more overseas people that's lower
Yeah.
cost. You kind of, I imagine you already have some people doing sponsorships, so they don't need to like you
Yep.
don't have it's just sponsorships. They can sell all the different types of sponsorships. So I think over time, depending on the revenue, like the next person you'll hire outside of head of newsletters and a person to do the content or help with the content operations is a marketer that's focused on audience growth and development, not just for the newsletters, but all of the different audiences you have.
And so is the head of newsletters, is that more of a content person or is that more of a marketing person or like what is the archetype of the first person I bring in?
Yeah, I think you could, if it's a content person, they have to understand marketing and operations because if they're just an editorial journalist, it's not going to be a good fit. And so I would think marketing, growth, and operations first rather than content first because the content's already being created. They just need to repurpose it and distribute
Yep.
it and put it in a format that people want in a different way. So I would lean towards that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today on the podcast. It's been helpful to me, and I'm sure helpful to our listeners. And everybody should check out Newsletter Operator. Excited to see what's coming from you. And what, just while I have you, why don't you share with us like what's your moonshot? Like what do you hope that this becomes in a few years?
I'm basically trying to be, picks and shovels and support for the next generation of media companies. So people exactly like you, it's going to be email focused because that's what I believe. Really email and podcast focused. So I have an agency for that. I have a course for that, and I have free content for that. And I'll have a community for those types of people later. So really simple stuff, but that's the type of people I'm trying to help.
Great. Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and look forward to more conversations.
Thank you. This is great.